Welcome to the OpsTok podcast. In this podcast, we explore the intersection of operations, technology, and business excellence with highly accomplished owners and operators.
Today's special guest, Alex Parrott-Mautner, Head of Operations in the Construction Industry and Champion of Sustainability. Welcome to OpsTok, the podcast where we explore the intersection of operations, technology, and business excellence in diverse industries and settings. Here on OpsTok, we interview highly accomplished operators and owners. I'm Tom, and let me introduce my co-host, Sahand.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Sahant here. Today, we have Alex Parrott-Mautner with us. Alex is the head of operations at a national construction company, and he's the founder of a sustainable growing company called Rezome. Love to hear more about that. We're excited to have you here with us for an engaging conversation. So welcome, and please tell us about yourselves. Welcome to the show.
Wonderful. Thanks both, and wonderful to be on the show. Yes, my name's Alex, as you introduced. I'm currently managing operations at a national construction company. I've sort of built this operational model for this company and really transitioned it. So I think we're going to talk a lot about that today, which I'm looking forward to. And prior to this, I worked for the Ministry of Health, working in their laboratories and genetics branch, doing some senior policy advisory work there. And before that, I worked for Mars Discovery District. So I was a senior associate at Mars Discovery, helping and leading industry workshops and stuff like that for some of our large power generation companies and transmission companies in Canada and the northern United States. So really looking forward to chatting with you both about all of this stuff.
Very, very diverse background, going from working inside the government to now in the construction industry. For a lot of people, like I've been fortunate and blessed enough to work on some construction projects, but for a lot of people that have no idea what construction's like, could you give us an overview of some of the key things when it comes to construction operations?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think when it comes to construction operations, operational work in general, as I'm sure many of your guests have implied, is really about communication. And I think construction operations is highly oriented towards communication as well. It goes from basic stuff. Think about the supply of materials, what you need in your home to actually build the things, or what you need on your site to actually build the things that you want, all the way to coordinating trades, coordinating vendors, to the actual finished product, and mixed in there is architects, designs, engineering, coordination with cities and regulatory environments. So there are a number of different factors, and the construction industry is really sort of impacted by a lot of different elements, specifically policy, government regulation, international supply chains, local supply chains. It's really sort of all encompassing, and that there is a lot when it comes to construction operations.
Awesome. Now, in construction, I think you would agree with me that there is a lot of interesting and old school ways of doing things. So let's switch to that. When it comes to operations, pardon me, what are some of the interesting things that you're witnessing in construction as compared to, you've been in the information industry, you've been at, government. So how does it differ? What are some of the, old ways that are, you observe them and you're like, there is definitely better ways of doing it. And what are some of the old ways maybe that you see and you're like, yeah, this is great. This is how it's been working. Let's not touch this one first. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because when you think of sort of the interesting operational models and some of the old guard that still persist in the construction industry, I mean, you have a relatively old demographic of ownership in the construction industry. So it's on the sort of scale. You have people that are 55 plus that own construction firms, that own different elements of the construction industry, and so they're used to doing work in a pretty I would say untechnical way. And what I mean by that is just simply almost non-technological. They don't have sort of that basis or that foundation of technology, because they didn't grow up in the time where technology was really foundationally important to their everyday life. It was more of the analog system, more of the picking up the phone and talking to people. And so there's a lot of operational models that exist still in the construction industry that are really oriented around true analog, I would say, systems. And those systems, just as an example, when I started here at the company I'm working at, it's a multi-million-dollar company in the GTA. Everything was still being scheduled on a whiteboard. There was nothing, and no plan ultimately to build a technological operation model that supports the business and reduces the actual impact and that reduces the true amount of work that goes into scheduling, that goes into the actual operations of the business. And I think that really highlights the challenge in the construction industry as a whole. Now, you have different models and you have different types of business, and the construction industry is a highly diverse industry. You have renovations to to housing, to condo builds, all the way to access style of construction where people are doing some really foundationally interesting and very cool stuff around making sure that people can access job sites that are really difficult to access. And that counts. That's a part of the construction industry, and those are very different models. So you're not really always comparing apples to apples, and the technological needs of each type of business and each type of business model differs as well. But I would say that when you're thinking of construction, when you're thinking of housing builds, so the more traditional style of construction, there are some very core sort of concepts that orient themselves around the operational models, and that is it's face to face, it's picking up a phone call, picking up the phone, calling whoever needs to be spoken to, and really sort of reactionary style of operations, and a really reactionary style of working, mostly due to the fact that there isn't a ton of resourcing that's actually able to be oriented, depending on the style and size of business, towards mapping out those operational plans, mapping out the actual process flow. So I think I've gone on a bit of a tangent here, but I think that's a short and long answer to your question, Sahand, is really those models still exist, and they are being translated as well to some of the new guard, I would say, that are taking over for their parents or taking over for other individuals in the industry.
And that's very interesting that you should bring that up, Alex, is as you talk about the old guard to the new guard, because we've seen that in manufacturing and small businesses where that's exactly what's happening, is as the parents are retiring and the kids are taking over, the average age of the owner is rapidly falling. So I'm just curious now, with your experience, how do you see that generational transition, or even with like new employees that are coming out of school, getting into the workforce for the first time? Because you mentioned there's this old guard, old processes, analog, whiteboard. How do you see the next generation fitting into construction?
Yeah, and look, I don't want to just jumping back for a second. I don't want to push those old guard ideas and those old guard ways of working sort of into the mud. I think those worked, and they worked for a long time. Ultimately, I think the foundational element of the industry is that it is becoming more complex, and for that reason, it's truly starting to require certain types of technological adoption that will make it easier for people to work. And so when I think of that new guard and that sort of general shift towards a younger age, I see three different things happening in the industry, really. The first thing is that the original owners and operators are simply retiring with sort of no pathway to extend their business. So there will be a general sort of shutdown, I think, of multiple businesses and many businesses that are more probably in the small to medium size I think that's going to be a trend that we will see is a decline and decrease, especially as labor is harder to find, especially as labor is more expensive, and also as general prices of goods are also more expensive, right? It's putting a ton of pressure on the business models of some of the smaller and medium-sized enterprises. When you have purchasing power, it's less of a challenge, and you can sort of have a different approach or a different outcome or reaction, sorry, to those pressures. In the adoption of or the transition to that new guard, I think two things will sort of I'm seeing sort of two things take place. One is you have a generation that were taught by the old guard, and so what that means is they have essentially brought in the same methodologies, the same processes, and the same types of working styles that they were taught. And those working styles don't necessarily differ too much. The true challenge or the true difference, I think, ultimately is that they may be slightly more technologically enabled just via the fact that they are and they were more exposed to technology and the transition from analog to true digital during the process of them learning all of the stuff they needed to learn to run that business. So I think that's one approach is going to be you have this new guard that is learned from their parents, learned from the old guard, and has slightly adopted some of the technology, but hasn't fully made that transition. I think that what that means for the future of those businesses is that they will have to rely heavily on the expertise of others outside of their business to help them transition, help them meet the needs of their clients, their customers, and meet the operational needs of their business. The other thing that I think happens is that you have the true new guard who has seen this transition take place, has seen the technological growth that's taken place in the industry, and has also seen the potential impact of the use of those technologies, and so is doing away entirely almost with the old guard style of working, and is focusing their business model entirely on the new technological way of working, the new technological way of engaging with their consumer, engaging with their trades, engaging with their subs and their vendors. And they're very proficient in it. It's easy for them to do. It makes it easy for them to track their business. It makes it easy for them to track their sales. It makes it easy for them to be less reactionary and to be more oriented towards the feedback that they're getting from the marketplace, or the feedback that they're getting from the individuals that they work with in the marketplace.
I want to stay on this point a little bit because we talked about how the new technology, the new way of doing things helps with, having the ability to see the insights earlier on, being able to, be less reactionary and more proactive. I want to zero in a little bit on, without sounding like too much of an old guy, talk a little bit about, hey, how has maybe this technology, on-demand stuff appearing before your eyes, in the same day, how has that impacted, or has it impacted some of the skill gaps or some of the things that you see in the market today too, when it comes to labor, when it comes to people that, you work with on a day-to-day basis in your industry?
Yeah, I think that there is a fundamental gap when it comes to labor. I think that what I'm going to term is sort of Gen Z. I'm just for full disclosure, I'm a millennial. So Gen Z being brought into the workforce, and even millennials, depending on where you're at on the spectrum of millennialism, is the working style and the accountability structures that were in place and that are in place, I think, in the sort of growth and there's a word I'm looking for, the growth and the general sort of transition to the workforce have changed quite rapidly. I think that when we're looking at the sort of Gen Zs and even some of the later millennials in the workforce, that they are used to engaging with the world in a very ad hoc and very instantaneous way. And so especially in the construction industry, when you have someone that is from, I would just call them the Uber generation, coming into the workforce and expecting a very quick, rapid return on their investment in their time investment in the company. You have a sort of a harrowing experience that they have to go through, which is they're not going to become the next VP of X or the head of Y or instantaneously. And I think, you know, when you live in a world full of highlight reels, it does challenge your expectations of who you are and what you can do. And I think what ultimately ends up happening is that you have an entire generation of people that are not confident in themselves whatsoever to really take on and have ownership over certain types of work. But what you do have to contrast that is you have an extreme confidence as to how the world should work and what the world should look like. And so I think that I think that's due to the fact that they have formed those opinions through the course of being fed and or absorbing the different types of social media, the different types of digital product that is out there currently. And so I think you have this very interesting sort of transition where you have people that are not necessarily fully engaged in the workplace because they don't understand how to take responsibility and ownership over the type of work. But what they do have a huge amount of ownership and responsibility over is how they think the world should work. And therefore, it's very easy for them to feel slighted by the difference, by the gap, the delta in that area where they're not feeling like they can take responsibility, but they also think that everyone should be responsible for the certain way that things should and do sort of play out in the industry. So ultimately, it leads to a challenging working experience and working environment as a manager of people, because you have to really show them the pathway to ownership. You have to show them the pathway to understanding the fact that that they matter in the workforce. And I think it's going to be a huge component of industry's time moving into this new workforce is building structure, building training, and building process enough to allow and engage and enable people and empower those people, while also making sure that you're meeting their expectations of how the workforce should look, how the workforce should feel, work from home, work-life balance. And so the investment in our labor is really going to increase, not just in the terms of salary, but I think in terms of the true overall investment that's going to take to retain talented labor and talented workers. I don't know if I went on a bit of a tangent there, but I think that's a long answer to your question.
And that's really amazing, Alex. I think, you know, for a lot of people that maybe haven't had the same experience as you know, you already gave a lot of great information about building training and empowering the next generation. Is there any maybe tactical tips, like let's say I'm a manager, I'm gonna hire some people fresh out of school, maybe like around the training, or what are some things that I could do as a manager to help on that? Any tips that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean it's going to be dependent on your business and your business model for sure. It's going to be dependent on the role of the individual as well. But one of the things that I find is really useful is just sitting down with the person, having a face-to-face goal setting session. I know it sounds boring, and it likely will be sort of boring for you and the other person. But if you can couch those goals in both personal and professional goals, and you can support that individual in ensuring that they understand that they're not just there to perform X, Y, and Z tasks, because that's the best way of demoralizing someone, is just saying your only value here is do X, do Z, and do Y, and at the end of the day, you can go home and you're replaceable by a machine at the end of the day. That is we're gonna I'm sure we'll talk about AI and on this as well in construction, but that's where you don't want to lead people. You don't want to lead people down the path of this is all you're good for. What you want to lead people down the path of is we are going to invest in you, and the reason that we're going to invest in you is because we value the skill set and the personality that comes with the performance of those tasks. And when you compare that with goal setting at the organizational level that matches goal setting for the personal, you actually end up really empowering individuals to start to take ownership. But that's just the first, I would say that's the first step in that journey. I think you can set goals, and then if you don't continue to track them, if you don't continue to sort of maintain those goals, have consistent meetings, match those goals with your own goals as a leader in the organization, build a culture of goal setting and excellence, then it's actually a really easy way to also disempower someone if you don't do it correctly. To say, okay, we're going to set a bunch of these goals for you. We're not going to support those goals, and you're just going to have to run off on your own and track them yourself. And all of a sudden, that person just feels entirely disempowered and almost like you've done the opposite of set those goals. You've set an unachievable goal and said, "Good luck, run with it." So I think that's which is that is a challenge for sure for anyone in any industry and any role and any level of seniority in those roles. Is you do have to make sure that you are maintaining and tracking those different sort of components of the work that you're doing. I mean, and sort of just to jump in here and add on to that, I think ultimately, goal setting, it needs to be done first and foremost at the senior leadership level, and then it needs to be brought back to some more foundational goals that can be achieved, so that those goals are aligned and they aren't mismatched. Because when you have those mismatches, that's really when those goals do become unachievable, because they may not necessarily achieve what the organization is seeking to achieve. And that's so there is a lot of work, I think, that goes into retaining talent. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure that talent is truly oriented towards the outcomes that you've set for them, and that those outcomes are organized towards the organizational objectives as a whole.
That's great. I, being a technologist, I'm going to take it away from people, bring it back to tech a little bit, just to chat, because you have such a tremendous experience in your current role in the new company that I want to talk about, and I want to bring it to the patterns and the challenges and the interesting examples that you've seen where you've applied technology to really, as a new entrant in a company, I don't want to call new guard, but yeah, hey, fresh perspective to a company that you've come in, and you've made some changes. Maybe you can even start with that whiteboard of yours, because that use case is very dear and near to my heart through another brand that I work with. But what happened? That scheduling on a whiteboard, what happened to that? What are some of the things that you're seeing within the context of the company that you've revolutionized, but also you have exposure to some of the larger construction companies and material suppliers too. What are some of the things that you're seeing that would be interesting to observe?
Yeah, I'm just gonna take a note here, because I want to address this question. I want to address both of your questions that were embedded here. So the one is around sort of operational technology, and the other one is really around interaction with other construction industry and other companies. So when it came to sort of the initial whiteboard approach, look, I think the whiteboard approach is a great approach. I have a whiteboard right beside me right now. I use it, and it's a fantastic model to use, because it does actually allow you to get a ton of information right in front of you, right? And I think that it makes sense when it comes to doing things for a day, or planning things out for a few hours in a few days. It gives you a sense of everything that you need to do. I think when it comes to transitioning away from some of those older models and transitioning to newer models, you end up with sort of 4 different operational challenges, I would say. And the 4 operational challenges really it are about how do you mimic the amount of information that you currently have, and that is currently required by whoever is using that sort of original approach. How do you map the operations to get to the point where you have that amount of information? How do you build sort of an adoption and change management framework to ensure that people support the outcomes of that change, and then how do you build in feedback and support to ensure that you're really orienting that change around the people and not around the technology itself, because technology is only as useful as its inputs. And so those are really like the four main challenges that I experienced in translating this specific element of the business was the schedule, right? So these are the four challenges that I had in translating the schedule into a piece of technology that worked. And ultimately, I'll just start with the first one around technology, around selecting the right technology. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as the right technology. There are better technologies and there are best technologies, and there are some good technologies out there. And ultimately, you have to choose the one that I think really makes it easiest for you to make the transition, while taking into consideration the potential growth opportunities that come after that transition, right? So you're having to think sort of initially, I need to think tomorrow, and then I also need to think a year from now, right? Because I could translate something to something that works for me tomorrow, but if I'm not thinking about a year from now, then I'm actually I'm sort of snickering myself a little bit, not allowing for that technology to grow with the business, right? So you need to look for something that has that growth potential, that growth opportunity. So that was the first challenge, and so my process was, okay, I need to just get people comfortable with looking at something that is technological and not something that is a whiteboard, and not something that is a photo that I can zoom in on my screen and figure out where they're going. So the first challenge that I had to face was, how do I just get people comfortable with the idea of technology? So what I did is I just replicated that whiteboard, and using Google, I just replicated the whiteboard, and we just used a Google version of that whiteboard just to say, okay, in the process of selecting the right technology, I'm going to use a good technology that's going to be short term, but that's going to help people translate the ideas that they have to a technological basis, right? So that was
like a Google Sheet, right? Sorry to interrupt. Google Sheet,
pretty
right?
much
like an Excel.
like a Google Sheet, yeah, exactly. So it was that was the initial translation. And that was done to sort of look almost like an Asana board, right? So you have the Gantt chart style flow, it just to get people comfortable even with the idea of a Gantt chart, right? This was all brand new to them. At that point, you're also starting to think about, okay, well, like what's comfortable, what's working in this? So you're getting feedback from the users at this point as well. And also, how do I translate this now to something that's inevitably going to be more complex, but ultimately will look very similar and will feel very similar, but may not have the same types of inputs still. So you're also having to sort of map the process that's taking place in the back end as you're doing this initial transition. So those were some. Ultimately, the challenge comes down to, at that point, once you've selected the technology, is do you have the right people and the right process in place to input what you need so that people can treat that technology as a source of truth? Because if they can't treat it as a source of truth, like they treated the whiteboard, like they treated the new Google Sheet, then that technology is going to fail before it's even launched. People won't understand it, and people won't be able to trust it. And therefore, when there's no trust, there's no use. And when there's no use, the technology is just there. You can pay as much as you want for it, but it just sits there. So those are some of the basic sort of, I would say, adoption challenges. When it comes to actual implementation, that's a whole separate ballgame, right? Like you're dealing with individuals, again, mostly in guard, that have never had to really look at the process from a foundationally from a really foundationally sort of questioning perspective. They've just gone into it and said, this is the way that things are done, and this is what the feedback that I get, and then this is how I action that feedback. But when you're adopting technology, you really have to take that fundamental question as to, is the information flow valuable, and how do the upstream sort of components of those information affect the downstream components of the information, with the technology sort of sitting right in the center of both of those things. And at the end of the day, you can't expect everyone who is interacting with the current process that they do have, or even with the new process, to fully understand the implications of making a decision that sort of rejects the process and falls outside of that same process. And so you have to plan for the inevitable, which is people aren't going to follow your process no matter what. And at the end of the day, you have to have operational models, and you have to have mechanisms in place to support the naysayers, to support the sort of, I would say that the ricochets that you might get from people trying to interact with the flow, right? And that's like it's a very challenging thing, technology adoption. At the end of the day, you have people that just outright reject it, and I think one of the interesting things in the construction industry is that you have a ton of people that truly just do not have the skill set to engage with new technology in the way that you might think, or you might, as I would call myself a technological native. Like I don't assume that people don't know how to use certain types of features in technology, but they don't. And so you have to make some very basic assumptions around usability, around true adoption on their end, and the fact that it may feel like more work for a lot of people as well. I'm going to stop the answering there because I wanted to see if there's anything else that you want to jump on to.
That was awesome. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was really, really great advice too for anybody doing the technological implementation and adoption. So thank you for sharing that. That was really great. But I did want to take some time, because I know we're getting close to the end, to talk about, in construction, sustainability, the venture that you're involved in, the rezone, because again, it kind of ties into change, right? Like construction itself has changed over the years. It's not the same way it's been done before. So let's talk a little bit more about sustainability, where you see that going forward, and the ventures you're involved in.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So when I think about the construction industry as a whole, I'm going to sort of bring it back even from sustainability, and I'm going to start to talk just a little bit about the industry environment generally. Is you do have a number of factors that impact construction and impact the industry. Right? If you think about sort of the traditional political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental framework that you can use to sort of decide what the impacts are and where things may be leading. Politically, you have, in Canada specifically, you have a huge focus on immigration. You have a huge focus on housing, and you also have a potentially new government that's going to be coming in and supporting the industry all over again with new rounds of funding. Right, the Conservative governments have quite often been very oriented around the investment into the construction industry. So you have all of these political factors. At the same time, you have these legal and regulatory factors that are also at play that are caused by some of the climate, some of the social interactions that inevitably sort of push up into and affect government as well. So at the end of the day, what the construction industry is reacting to right now, and it is a slow adopter, is the environmental and social, really the social pressures around environmentalism, and the economic factors around environmentalism as well. Because as you look at the change in climate, as you look at pandemics becoming potentially more regular, as you look at some of these crazy impacts of climate change, these crazy impacts of population growth, you ultimately have to look at the foundations of the sector, and the sector is having to do that. But it's always it's sort of the last it's on the last rung, if you will, of the impacts of all of these things, because a lot of elements of our general politic are affected first. So when I look at the construction industry, it's reacting to increased pricing pressures. It's reacting to political instability. It's reacting to supply chain challenges, and if we have an increase in protectionism in the American economy, for example, in the next election, then there are impacts to supply chain and to materials in Canada, undoubtedly. So you're having to sort of think and react to all of these things. But ultimately, what's happening is that as the industry transitions to becoming more environmentally aware, becoming more economically oriented towards the environmental outcomes of its work, it's going to have to think of, there's going to be a bit of a reckoning ultimately, right? You have a bunch of business models that, despite what people think, operate on fairly thin margins and with not a ton of runway. And so at the end of the day, what you have happening is you have increased labor costs, you have increased supply chain costs, you have more general, I would say, instability there. And as soon as you enter into a regulatory environment where they're saying, hey, you have to do this, you have to make sure that you're measuring your emissions. I need to understand the embedded carbon that is in all of the materials that you've used. I need to understand your overall emissions profile. You need to report on that, otherwise face a fine. You enter a time where construction becomes even more complex and technology is inevitable. And so at that point in time, you're sort of faced with a challenge as a business to say, okay, either I change my business model, I adopt this technology, and I invest a crap ton of money in this stuff, or I shut my doors, because at some point I have to reconcile that, right? So businesses being faced with that challenge, and this sort of leads into the startup that I'm looking at, and really where the foundational concept of circularity comes into play is businesses have to look at their cost models, and they have to start to think about where they can really find unique ways of adding value to their business, and unique ways of reducing their overall cost, the overall cost of their business, and the overall impact that their business may be having on the environment. And it may come from reporting in certain circumstances, but it may also just simply come from reducing the number of times that you have to run to the dump to drop off a load of wood, shingles, tile, and bricks, right? Because each of those things costs money. And so what I've been working on is sort of transitioning to the idea of circularity is a business that actually takes the waste from construction sites. So think of old brick, old wood, old tiles and stuff like that, and turns it into a growing media. So takes it, crushes it, mixes it together, and turns it into something that you can actually grow plants in or grow food in. And I think ultimately that's sort of the way in which industries need to start to think and shift is how do I take the things that currently cost me money, and is there someone out there that's willing to buy it, and either I can do it myself as an industry player, I can take this and I can build an entirely new business model, or is there someone out there to buy it? And I think there's a huge opportunity out there right now for people who are interested in circular economy, who are interested in environmentalism and sustainability, who are interested in reducing, overall environmental impact of industry, to look at some of the what we would sort of call waste in the industry, whether or not it's true physical waste, or if it could be wasted time or wasted energy, and think about circular ways in which those things can add value, because the more time that we spend not doing that, we're really wasting the value of multiple, I would say like we're sort of pulling ourselves away from a business model that could truly impact a business for the better, and could actually be the difference between that business surviving and that business not surviving in this whole transition. And I think just to give you an example of sort of the regulatory environment that we are going to be entering into in London, I can't remember which regulation specifically it is. I can follow up with you after if you want to provide it to your listeners. But there's a regulation in London, England, where as a building owner, to renew your lease, you have to meet a certain emissions standard, which means about 20 million square feet of business space, of leasable space in downtown London core is actually unrenewable because they're not meeting their emission standards, right? And if you think about that from the perspective of the construction industry, that's a first step towards this type of transition, this type of industry transition. But the impact of that is foundationally huge, because you have building owners now, or operators, who have to go in and invest in deep energy retrofits, have to invest in offsets, have to invest in all these things, and now they're on the hook for this when they're already running fairly thin margins to begin with. So you do have some huge operational costs coming to the industry, and I think you do see people in, I would say, world-class cities, and Toronto being one of those world-class cities, starting to think about, okay, well, how do I pull myself away from some of those crazy carbon-intensive things and build with something that's entirely different? And so you have businesses like Task Developments who are taking old buildings, grinding them down, using those ground products to mix into concrete, and then they're casting the new building with the old building. And so you have people looking at really interesting ways of doing that, or you have mass timber buildings. We have, I think, 3 being one that's currently built in Toronto, and I think 2 others that are being built, or it could be 2 that are built and 1 that's being built. I can't remember, but mass timber is another way. And still, it's the technology around measuring the carbon intensity of all of those things is really difficult, and it's shaky because there are so many inputs, and they never take into account the actual duration fully of the life cycle of those things either. Because at the end of the day, concrete lasts for, let's say, 70, 80 years, begins to crumble, then you have to take that building down and you have to recast it, or you have to rebuild it. And so there's a constant cycle of carbon usage that you have to start to take into consideration when thinking about how the industry is going to transition itself from one that is entirely unfocused on the environmental sustainability of their work to one that is entirely focused on and actually brings almost all of their value from the environmental sustainability of their work. So long answer to your question, and I apologize, but I just wanted to sort of go through the whole spectrum, I think, of things that can impact and that will be impacting the industry and now and into the future.
No, that's awesome. And thank you for going into the details. I mean, for such a huge contributor to the carbon footprint, the construction and property industry is a big player in that. So thanks for outlining all the different aspects about it. As we get closer to the sort of the time allotted to the podcast, I wanted to ask you, first of all, like super appreciative of your time with us, but also what can our listeners, or what can we do to help your cause, to find you, get connected? What are some of the things that we can do for you?
Well, first, I want to thank you guys for having me on. This has been awesome, and I'm looking forward to just the listening to this in my spare time. Not that, but I think ultimately when it comes to sort of how you guys can help, I think this first and foremost has been an amazing help. It's allowed me to spend some time really thinking about what I've learned in the industry, and that's an amazing support. If people are interested to connect, I would love to connect with people that are interested in circular economy, interested in environmental construction, or that are thinking about their business and thinking about the waste that their business produces and are looking to potentially try and build a revenue stream or revenue model out of that waste. I think that there are a ton of opportunities to do so, especially in the construction industry, but more generally across industries. So I'd love to chat with anyone who's interested in any of those topics.
And what's the best way? We'll put is it LinkedIn or?
Yeah, LinkedIn's great. Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I think you guys you'll throw my LinkedIn link there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Yeah, just a real paradigm shift, everything you shared with us. I mean, we went from the human aspect of management to technology to really a paradigm shift in the whole industry and sustainability. So it was very, very informative podcast. I really, really enjoyed it. And I know our listeners will listen also. Very, very interesting. Yeah, some incredible things you're working on. And thank you again for being on the show and sharing them with us.
And no, it's my pleasure and happy to be here.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for all the great questions.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
See you later. Thank you.
Yep. Bye.